Okay, now we can move on to District Council session. Item 10 is a work session on zoning text amendment, 1907, communication towers. We are joined this afternoon by our colleagues from DPS, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, the Office of the County Executive, and several other county departments. Hello. The intent of ZTA 1907 is to amend the zoning ordinance so that small cell antenna provisions are in compliance with the FCC small cell order. The proposed amendment covers allowing certain telecommunication towers as a limited or conditional use in certain residential zones, revising the standards for telecommunications towers allowed as a limited or conditional use, revising the conditional use findings required for the replacement of a pre-existing pole, and generally amending use requirements to address certain telecommunications towers. However, before I pass it over, I was also surprised, of course, that we again received a late-breaking memo with complicated amendments that we, just like the one we received last week. So the council is obviously not put in the best position to make good policy when we receive late-breaking memos like that on complicated issues. Let me pass it over to our council legislative attorney, Li-Vu Ndu, and Fed Chair, Councilmember Reamer. Li-Vu?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Council President. Li-Vu, I'll turn it to you in just a moment to walk us through the packet. I suppose as chair,
Please.
I'll just, is that?
Please go ahead. Sorry, my notes
okay.
are a little backward here. Yes, you should go first.
Thank you. I just want to share an observation or two. We have all been through a terrible pandemic, and we have all learned a lot about public health. And this information has been available. Sorry, my kids are blowing me up here with their phones. This information has been available all along, but I went to look at it, again last night and this morning. The National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, located in Montgomery County, not the only federal agency with oversight here for health based in the county. You can see similar information on the FDA's website. And there's actually an agency called the National Council for Radiation Safety. And it's actually the true scientific agency charged with monitoring the research. It's based in Bethesda. They all say the same thing. The National Cancer Institute's page makes very clear that the waves coming out of our devices are not of health concern, presuming the installations follow federal policy, and that basically the way you could be injured by these waves is if you were burned by them. They were so concentrated that they actually would burn your skin, that the heat would cause some kind of damage to your DNA. I think it's clear to all of us that we are nowhere near anything like that. And that basic theoretical framework for this entire body of research has been in place for decades. And in fact, it's one of the best understood concerns. It's nothing like chemicals or other things where there's suddenly a new compound and people have no idea how it works. Non-ionizing radiation is well understood. It has been used in radios and Wi-Fi and microwaves, in walkie-talkies, in cell phones, 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. It's all the same. It's on the same side of the spectrum that science has clearly established with all existing research. The weight of it all together clearly establishes its safety. Research is always ongoing. World Health Organization comes to the same conclusion. So if you don't believe that there is a health concern, what is the basis of trying to severely restrict these installations? I just ask everyone to think about that question. What is the basis of trying to severely restrict these if you actually follow the science and believe the science? Secondly, we did receive a memorandum from the executive literally minutes ago, and it has a severe restriction in its proposal. It seeks to limit the installation of any antennas to no closer than 75 feet to the nearest building. And we know that there are vast numbers of neighborhoods where that will essentially put the installation of wireless infrastructure out of reach. And so, you know, there are some minor technical elements of the thing that I don't think are worth worrying about either way, but we received an effort, which I just don't think is in good faith, to send us something just moments before we take up session. You know, I think the only intent is to try to further delay our deliberation. And, you know, we have been through a multi-stakeholder process for years, for more than 5 years. And we have had a committee of 9 and a committee of 3 working through this with stakeholders and getting the benefit of input. And so the ordinance that we have before us is crafted by council staff to ensure our federal compliance. We're following our council attorney's guidance as to how to stay on the right side of federal law, FCC mandates, and to ensure that we are not left behind as the world progresses in the deployment of wireless infrastructure. So I know we're getting a lot of emails. We're all getting a lot of emails. There's a lot of scary stuff that's being said about this. You know, if it was bad, folks in DC who already have it in Virginia would be telling us, boy, you don't want this. You know, that's not what's happening. So what we've actually proposed is more restrictive. I have to confess, it's more restrictive than the DC ordinance. It's more restrictive than the Virginia ordinance, because we calculated that we would need a more restrictive ordinance to pass something here. And restricting it yet further just, I think, furthers our distance from what is really a best practice going forward. So with that, I'll turn it to Lavu and ask her to walk through the packet, and we can consider amendments that anyone would choose to offer. Thank you, Mr. Council President.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. So as you know, at the last work session, I went through a detailed overview of the ZTA as well as some of the issues. So today I do want to make sure that there's plenty of time for discussion and for questions. And so I'm going to do a sort of briefer version of what I did last time, and then leave time for both the discussion of, I know, amendments that some council members have proposed, as well as the county executives. As has been noted, that county executive memo did come in really late. I have had a chance to read it, so could answer some questions about it. But of course, there's other points of it that I believe most of the council members would want more time to review and research and look into. One thing I would recommend, and again, up to all of you, if you'd like to take straw votes, I would suggest that be done per issue. So that way it's easier to determine what parts there's consensus on that we can move on from, and then what pieces further discussion or amendments might be necessary. And then, of course, we have staff from DPS, Planning, OZA, as well as TEBS to answer any questions. You'll also note that the memo that is submitted in the packet today is largely similar to the memo from last time, with the addition of 2 sections that were requested. First, a section on pending legal cases, and then a section on the county executive's first memo. So first, brief overview again of what 5G is. 5G provides increased capacity and speed for end users, and that requires lower powered antennas that serve a smaller area with higher data volumes. And typically these are placed on streetlights and utility poles, and the streetlights usually need to be replaced in order to accommodate additional height and weight. There are both legal and policy reasons, which I am not actually going to go over again this time, but we'll answer questions about them. So in the current code, in residential areas, the minimum setback is 300 feet, and all must be conditional use. This does not meet the shot clock because our conditional use process takes several months, if not a year, if not longer. So this basically effectively prohibits towers in many locations. Per the 2018 FCC order, You can't have restrictions on fees. The shot clock is 60 or 90 days, and you cannot effectively prohibit service. I know there's been a lot of questions about what effectively prohibit means. I know this somewhat sounds like legal mumbo jumbo, but the courts have decided that effectively prohibit means materially inhibit, which in clarifying orders and in other case law means restricting the coverage of that data use. So after there were 3 Fed committee work sessions that came up with almost all the provisions in this ZTA. So first is the limited use standards. So I do really want to emphasize here the limited use does have many design standards that conceal the enclosure as well as not allowing exterior wiring. So one of the things that did come out of the Ninth Circuit appeal in the county's favor was some guidelines on being able to let local jurisdictions do more concealment and stealth requirements. The height for the limited use is based on the width of the right-of-way. So it's 6 feet if the right-of-way is less than 65 feet, and then 15 feet if it's more than 65 feet. And that's the additional feet over the height of the replacement or existing tower pole. And then the setback was reduced to 30 feet from buildings intended for human occupation. Next is the modified conditional use. So the modified conditional use would be triggered for all towers that are less than 30 feet from a building. Again, because the conditional use process typically takes anywhere from 6 months to a year, a new process has to be established. The only way conditional use can be done in this ZTA is if in some way it is shortened. It cannot be the way our current process works. So the way that was done was by doing a few things. First, planning board and planning staff are no longer required to make recommendations, but the hearing examiner can ask for recommendations if they would like that additional input. Second, the hearing examiner's findings are limited, which of course reduces the time they would need to push out all of these decisions. And the findings will be limited to finding the least visually intrusive location, so that it's not on the hearing examiner to pick all those locations. The applicant actually has to submit those at the time of the application. And the hearing examiner can still consider various aesthetic things: the use of screening, the color, existing tree coverage, vegetation. All of those are factors that the hearing examiner will also be able to take into account. Next, allowing consolidated applications. Because these antennas need to be placed closer together, if you're going to have 2 or 3 on one street, rather than having to have 3 different hearings, which is a burden on both the hearing examiner staff and on the public and on the providers, these cases can be consolidated so there can be just one hearing. And then lastly, the modified conditional use process will eliminate the Board of Appeals, because any time spent before the Board of Appeals is still going to count against the county in terms of calculating the shot clock. And so by eliminating the Board of Appeals, appeals would instead go directly to circuit court. Another thing that would happen in the modified conditional use process is normally notice is sent to any property owners within a half mile. You can't see a 50-foot tower from a half mile away, and that's why notice was reduced to 300 feet. Again, because we can't consider health effects, that's a better way to determine who gets that notice. And then notice will be sent to the municipality as well as neighborhood associations, property owners, and other people right nearby. And then a sign will also be posted on the property. So that covers, you'll get the notice in the mail and then also see the sign right outside because it's right in your neighborhood. The third process in the ZTA is the waiver and objection process. So this is for new poles, as in not replacement and not existing, just a wholly new pole. For example, a street that doesn't have street lights or doesn't have enough poles to provide any antennas. So for a new pole and for poles that could go up to 50 feet in height. The reason for adding a provision up to 50 feet in height is the FCC defines small cell antennas as ones that are 50 feet or under. So the concern is if the county always caps at 35 feet, then the provider could say you're not actually providing for all small cell antennas. So under this process, if all other conditions are met in terms of stealth and checking all the different application requirements, then the provider would apply for a waiver to say, I meet all these requirements, but it is going to be a wholly new pole, or I do need it to go up to 50 feet. So they apply for that waiver, and then notice will be sent to all interested parties within 300 feet. And again, that's the municipality, that's the associations, that's the property owners. Once that notice is received, anybody who received that notice or fits in those categories can file an objection. As soon as an objection is filed, a hearing is triggered, and then that hearing is going to run similarly to the hearing for conditional use standards. So the main difference between the two processes is if no objection is filed, then no hearing has to be held, which is mostly just efficient. And then there were two proposed amendments after the Fed committee work session. The first was from Councilmember Friedson, which says that we're not going to put up any new poles unless if there is a usable tower within 150 feet, because we don't want to be putting up new poles if there's already one available. So that encourages co-locating and not having pole proliferation. And then the second amendment was from Councilmember Reamer, and it basically limits the limited use, it mirrors the limited use standards for height. So if a new pole is going up, it needs to be similar in height to whatever the closest pole is. So that is an overview of the ZTA itself. I guess one suggestion would be we could go through limited use, pause, discussion, then conditional use, then waiver and objection, or we could dive straight into the amendments and possibly the county executive memo if council members feel prepared to discuss it.
Chairman Reamer.
Thank you. So I would certainly recommend that we consider the amendments from Councilmember Friedson and myself. If a council member wants to propose some or all of the executive's amendments, then we can consider that. I do not feel that we need to just consider it because he sent us a memo an hour ago. And I don't think there's any question that trying to go through that line by line will totally derail this conversation because it's just too technical. And it's too hard to understand what those restrictions mean in real time. I think we know what they mean, but it won't be easy to go through them. So I would, I certainly don't support what the executive has recommended. I don't think it would be wise to adopt it. And I don't know if a council member intends to move them. I'll say again, very broadly, what the executive has sent over provides a very significant restriction relative to what the committee has proposed, and certainly relative to what other jurisdictions have done. And so, you can take it from there. So we have a committee recommendation. Does that actually need a motion, or is that, I believe that's before the body, the move. So I think, we could have general conversation. Council members may wish to share comments and then proceed to the amendments, certainly that have been laid out in the packet. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought somebody was waving at me. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to the committee for tremendous work, and to you, Livu. It's just absolutely amazing how really detailed you've broken down this packet and allowing us to follow. I will tell you that as chair of the National Association of Counties Broadband Task Force, 5G is an instrumental part of what we'll need to do to ensure that residents have internet connectivity into the future. It is a part of the future-proofing model that was just released by the National Association of Counties yesterday, and is an essential part of our framework in terms of ensuring that we can really erase the digital divide. So I just want to impart on folks just how important this is and how important this conversation is. And I'm happy to see that even the proponents of, changing some things around, or even those who want to delay, still acknowledge that 5G plays an integral role. I truly appreciate that. I will say this, when it comes to the county executive's recommended amendments, those are certainly something that we don't have to take up today and can still take up when we finalize. So there is no sense of urgency that we have to address something that we received at, I think, 12:50 or whatever the case may be this afternoon and take that up now. We have plenty of time to look that over between now and the next time that we actually formally vote on the measure. And if there's something that someone recommends, they have an opportunity to talk it over with their fellow colleagues, with all of us, and we can dispense of those. So I just wanted to say that from a procedural perspective, that it's not necessary for us to even take up any of those right now. We can certainly look at them as we've done with others in the past where we received late amendments and said, we'll take a look at them. And certainly if there is something that makes sense, I would ask Lebu that some of them are listed or labeled as process oriented and not really substantive minor amendments. And if some of those do make sense, if you could let us know what those are, certainly, I would support those and move those forward. I would just like to say that, look, when we're looking at our surrounding jurisdictions and what they're doing, that also weighs with us as well. We've done it with everything that we do, whether it's minimum wage, whether it's other kinds of things, and we try and ensure that folks understand that we are the DMV. We are this combined collaboration of counties and cities that come together. And so we try and make it easy for our residents, not only to understand, but also to benefit from the great things that we have to offer. And I think that 5G is one of those as well, where we want to try and remain as consistent as possible. Obviously, there will be nuances that are there, but it seems to me as though where we found ourselves in terms of the recommendations, when I look at surrounding jurisdictions like Prince George's, and I was just there, National Harbor, talking with them about 5G and about their implementation back when they passed it in 2019. When I look at the District of Columbia and the things that they've done there, when you look at Fairfax, or Arlington, I talked to them and talked about what they did. Fairfax as well. It really is just one of those things where, again, that consistency does matter. And being able to ensure that we're continuing to promote these positive aspects of digital equity are going to be incredibly important. And so, again, I don't have any specific recommendations beyond the fact that I think we should delay any conversations about the county executive's amendments until the following session, which is where I think we'll have formalities around formal votes. And in the meantime, if folks have things that they want to bring up, I would just ask them to pass that off to all council members so that we can all kind of start agreeing on some of these things that maybe accoutrements that make sense. And of course, with Lebu's great guidance in this effort too, we can get ourselves the best bill possible. So again, thank you to the committee and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to be clear, that is the process, just to state for the millions watching at home, we are not taking a final vote today, correct?
Correct.
Right.
So I think that was, a lot of people are confused about that. Just wanted to say that. Obviously, I'm on the committee. We took action and appreciate my colleagues' work on this. There are two things in particular that I think would be helpful. One, several of us, I think Councilmember Katz, I know I did as well, asked for an update on the the litigation around this issue. There is a very detailed and thorough analysis of the Ninth Circuit case in the memo, which we really appreciate. We did receive something else from the executive side on other parts of the litigation, and I think it would just be helpful to get a brief summary, maybe first with you, Ms. Nadeau, of what you produced, and then if the folks from the executive's office wanted to add something briefly about their document, I just think we should get that out there, and I personally would just like to hear that, and then go from there.
So I will start with, sorry. Okay, so I covered City of Portland last time. That's the Ninth Circuit case we were party to. And then, of course, the Supreme Court decision where cert was denied. There was another case, a decision was issued May 2021 City of Eugene v. FCC. That one was about franchise fees. And again, the court upheld most of the FCC's order regarding fees. The two bigger cases that are still pending is City of Boston v. FCC. That was filed at DC Circuit Court of Appeals in August 2020. Oral arguments were in January, and that was filed by several cities and counties, including Montgomery County. And the issue on appeal in that case was stealth and concealment obligations. And the FCC actually requested additional time to reconsider its position. So it's currently on hold until August. And then another pending case is Environmental Health Trust v. FCC. And that's also before the DC Circuit Court. And it was argued before the U.S. Court of Appeals on January 25th, 2021. So that one actually challenges the RF emissions and the finding that they didn't have to be reviewed again. Because that was heard in January, of course, there's no way to say when exactly they will issue an opinion, but presumably it would be soon since those oral arguments were a while ago.
And at issue, and the first one seems pretty straightforward. That's related to, as you said, to the stealth and concealment obligations. So depending on the outcome of that case, it could have some impact on what municipality in jurisdictions like ourselves can or cannot do or required to do as far as how these are deployed. And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, that is correct.
And then the second case is related to the RF standards, and that this is that issue of like there hadn't been a review in a long period of time, and there should be a review of the health and safety, and that we were party to both of these cases, correct?
I do not believe we were a party to the Environmental Health Trust one. That's the one about the RF emissions. We were a party to the stealth and concealment case.
Got it. Okay. I appreciate that. I just think we should have that out there. People should understand what's going on. And obviously, whatever action we take, we could always come back in light of these and take a different action or adjust, of course. The other question I had was related to the county executive's memo. I agree with Councilmember Rice that especially since we're not voting, we should not go into a long, drawn-out conversation about something we just received. But I do think it'd be helpful to hear briefly, what the upshot of this is and a response about the timing of why you just sent it, and then and what you're hoping to accomplish. Again, briefly, and because I think we don't want to go point by point, but I do want to ask whoever is appropriate from the executive to respond to that.
Is that Ms. Spielberg or Mitzi?
Sure. Mitzi Herrera with the Department of Technology and Enterprise Business Solutions. So in regard to the timing, yes, having the language sooner would be better. I believe that the executive's position is that they were hoping that there would be more discussion or potentially another working group formed. So they were not in amendment mode, but with the pending review of the items and then following the discussion in the last council session, the thinking is that having those amendments on paper would be helpful for the council deliberations.
Okay, and do you want to briefly, we heard, I read it briefly this earlier about the changing in 75, how far. Do you just want to give me a brief summary of what the gist of them are? Some of them are technical, some are not, what?
Sure, let me, I'll try to be brief and just hit the highlights. The biggest one, I think, is the change in terms of what is subject to the conditional use and what is subject to the waiver process. So in the draft that came out of the Fed committee, the proposal is that you could have poles that are as close as 30 feet to a house, and then you can go to the conditional use process if you want to make that closer, or if you want to have a pole. In the cases where if I was replacing a pole and it met all the conditions of limited use, but I want to put in a new pole, right? So what council's proposing is, in that case, that you could go to a waiver process, and only if somebody objects would you hold a conditional use hearing, because the thinking behind it is that everything that around the pole would meet a limited use standards, but for the fact that it's a new pole, not replacing something. But then what the Fed committee also does is say that if you want a height increase, you could also go to the waiver process. And so what the county executive is proposing is that because we're making the limited use much more lenient, and you can get closer, what we're suggesting is that if you want to do something that deviates from the limited use, you should go through the conditional use process. But we agree in the case, and we agree also in discussions with OZA, in the cases where you're proposing something that would otherwise meet limited use, but for the fact that it's new instead of replacing something, then that could go to the waiver process. And what we're further proposing as a compromise in the waiver is that as it's set up right now, notice is mailed to people who are within 300 feet or associations. And then if there's an objection, the hearing examiner decides whether to grant the waiver or not grant the waiver. If you don't grant the waiver, it goes to conditional use. What the county executive is suggesting as a compromise is that notice, also the area in which you provide notice should be expanded. And those notices are provided by the applicant, not by OZA. But that OZA also posts the notice on its website. And you'd still have a rule that if there's somebody who's living nearby or association that objects to the waiver, then the hearing examiner could say no. If nobody nearby objects, then the hearing examiner can grant the waiver. However, if somebody does object and it goes to conditional use, then anybody in the county can participate in that conditional use hearing, similar to the way that if you have something that goes to conditional use now, anybody can come in and participate. And the issue is that notice is just mailed to the people who live nearby. And what you're suggesting is put the notice on the website and people who are interested in the issue can follow. If there's somebody local who objects, it goes to conditional use, then they have the opportunity to participate. And that's important because if you're eliminating the Board of Appeal and you have to go to court, part of what it is that you participated in the objection process is kind of the trigger of how you can continue to participate in the hearing. So
I appreciate that. That's helpful. And again, I appreciate you acknowledging that sooner would have been better. And that's a helpful summary. And I'll ask more questions offline if I have them.
Okay.
Those are obviously two different. One materially impacts what we passed out of Fed. The other seems a little just more of a tweak, a little bit.
And the memo is set up to sort of front load the first things. There are a couple other ones just specifically related to height that are sort of some tweaks to it that we think that will help address things and in the implementation of it, have it roll out more smoothly. And then the last things are just sort of minor wordsmithing, but
okay.
It is legislation, the words matter.
All right. Thank you, Mitzi, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council Vice President Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just going to make some general comments here. I worked in the executive branch for 12 years, and this getting a memo less than an hour before a session fits a pattern of this administration, which is unfortunate. And I think one of three things have happened here. One is that this is not as high a priority as other items are within the administration, or there would have been phone calls individually to council members to talk about the technical aspects of the amendments that are being proposed. So I question the true sincerity of this memo, quite frankly. And I also believe that the county executive has made his opposition to this bill consistent all the way through, back to when he was on the council and this was initially introduced. The other two things that may have happened are, obviously the administration has a lot on its plate. And so, but I think had this been a higher priority and a truly sincere interest in trying to find some common ground, then that would have been present. Or this is just another attempt to delay a bill that has been discussed for years at this point, with multiple public sessions, with an infinite amount of public input, both formally and informally. And so I do not give, quite frankly, a great deal of weight to the memo that was distributed to us less than an hour ago. And I was prepared today, quite honestly, to move that we vote on this today, because I feel we have had extensive deliberations and discussions. I do believe that there are likely some elements of the memo that were sent over that do warrant some discussion. And so I hate to put Ms. Nadeau on the spot here, but she has proven extremely capable, and I've been extremely impressed with how she has shepherded this process through the committee and the packets that she has presented. And so from 30,000 feet, Ms. Nadeau, are there, understandably, you've had less than an hour to process this memo, which is ridiculous. But could you please just describe, are there some elements within this memo that you believe, just from 30,000 feet in your opportunity to just skim this, that you believe do warrant some further discussion? And could we have that discussion now? Because the longer we protract this issue, with everything else that we have to address and deal with, there are so many important elements of county business right now. And I, for one, am prepared to move this forward. But I'd like your opinion as to your initial reactions and whether there are some elements of the memo that was written that you do believe are consistent with the direction that the Fed committee has taken and what it appears to be the majority of the council supports at this point.
Well, first, thank you for that high praise. There are actually a couple of the more minor things in the county executive's memo that I actually think could work and would be appropriate. And then, of course, there are others that I think stray from my reading of the FCC order. What I would suggest is I can go through each of them and pull out the ones like right now that I think are the sort of easier to implement, if that makes sense. And then also I believe in order to vote, we would need the final draft before us. So if the council were to decide, okay, we're going to review this in the next couple weeks, and then by the time we go to action and have that final one in front of us, I can make sure to incorporate all those more minor and easier to put in there pieces. In terms of full discussion, I will say that a lot of things in this memo actually were mentioned in the memo from previously, and so for that reason are in my packet. So maybe the easiest thing to do would be to go through those last few pages of today's packet, which addressed the memo from last time. Specifically, in terms of discussion, I'm thinking about like setting the setback based on speed limit, the idea of a work group, all those sort of bigger things that were already addressed. Does that answer your question, Councilman Rabinowitz?
It does. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Council Vice President, are you proposing we vote on the whole thing today?
No. What I wanted to hear more, just generally speaking, regarding whether or not there were some elements of the memo and Ms. Nadeau's opinion that warranted further discussion, and it sounds like there are. And in wanting to, it's taken us several years at this point, and it's important that we do our best to try as best we can to get this right, taking all these other factors into account, and that other jurisdictions are light years ahead of us on this. I am interested in certain elements that would improve upon what has already been discussed within the Fed committee, but I'm not supportive of delaying this beyond something that's reasonable. And I'd like to vote on this certainly before we go on recess in August.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think your point's very well taken, because maybe my memory's failing, but I think just a couple weeks ago we created an entirely new, additional, highly paid, high-level position to improve upon the county executive's unacceptably poor communications and intergovernmental relations over the last few years. So it's just kind of ironic that for the second time in 2 weeks, we've received a memo in the middle of a council meeting. Anyway, we have two amendments, right, Mr. Chairman, from the committee. And if
Mr. President?
Yeah, Councilmember Rice, go ahead.
Can I just ask a point of clarification? So is it our intention that, because we have it listed, and I think it's actually good that we're doing this because it was listed in the agenda, and so I just want to be very clear about process. It was listed in the agenda as a work session and not work session in action. And so I do think it's appropriate for us, as we're signaling to the community, to let folks know when we intend to actually have action on this. And so my question is, will we have work session in action for the 20th or the 27th, just so I can make sure that my office and other offices have the ability to know and strategize and be able to make sure that we've got an understanding of all the amendments that are floating so we can be ready and prepared to vote.
Sure. I mean, the chairman and Ms. Ndu might want to chime in here, but I think it'd be certainly reasonable to take a vote by the 27th and to make sure we have all the discussion we need and all the amendments, proposed amendments, in writing before then, with enough time for council members to consider them. Ms. Ndu, you're nodding.
Yes, my council staff recommendation was going to be, I think it's possible on the 27th to have the final vote, and you would have before you the full ZTA with all proposed amendments that you're voting on a final product. And that would also give the weeks leading up to then to get all those amendments drafted and put in there.
Right. Is that fine? So we'll plan on the 27th and have the 20th to do additional work on this as needed.
But can we, again, just to clarify from a process perspective, can we dispense of some of the amendments that were proposed by the folks like Councilmember Friedson and Councilmember Reamer? I think the more we get closer to a final draft that people can see, the better it is. So if we can incorporate some of those, that would also be helpful. So if we can take some votes on that, that would be helpful as well. Just
right. I thought the plan was to take straw votes on those three, I guess, today. Right? Is that fine with everybody?
Well, can I?
Yeah, I mean, can I just the packet did say to make preliminary decisions straw vote. I don't know if further in the packet it says which ones, but it even though on the agenda it is stated that it's a work session, the packet does point to the fact that today we were going to make preliminary decision straw vote, which I interpreted as straw votes, which then allows our staff to prepare the final packet for a subsequent session to make the final vote. So I'm also trying to figure out what it is that we're doing. Are we saying that we might take partial straw votes and then have another session to take more straw votes? And then if we're ready, maybe we take final vote before we go on recess? Because again, this is what the packet said, is that today we would take straw votes, which is what we always do, especially after very lengthy deliberations on issues. We take straw votes, and then the next session, we take the final vote. So I'm also, just for clarity, trying to figure out, this is our second session. I thought that was what the session was all about. But, you know, it is important to note that we do keep getting last minute memos, which prolong the amount of time that we're going to dedicate to this. So I'm not really sure that we're going to get to final votes before we leave. That it would be important to be very clear on what it is that we're doing.
Yes, in work sessions, my recollection is always have never precluded straw votes. There's no reason we can't take straw votes on as many amendments as the body wants to today, right? And allow staff to prepare a more advanced packet for the next work session, right?
Correct, but I think there should be clarity so that so the world operating under the same assumption that today we're taking the straw votes that then will lead to the next session taking final votes. But that's not what I thought I heard. I thought I heard that we're going to take some straw votes, wait for a analysis of the executive's last minute memo, come back, take straw votes on those, which I guess means that then we have to come back again to take final votes. So maybe I didn't hear that correctly, but I'm just trying to understand what it is that we're doing.
I'm open to whatever the will of the body wants. Obviously, what I'd suggest is, I mean, council members would have to move any of these amendments. So we have, I think, council members prepared to move some amendments today. If council members read this memo, which I have not read, and put some amendments forward next week, we'd have the opportunity to have a work session with some straw votes on additional amendments next week in preparation for a final vote on the 27th. Is that fine with everybody? Does that seem reasonable to everybody? Councilmember Glass.
So I'll use this as an opportunity to talk about an amendment that I would like to introduce, or at least a motion that I'd like to make, given the tone and tenor of this conversation, which there is a lot of confusion. The ZTA itself has elicited a lot of confusion, and the process that we're undergoing now is a little confusing as well. But let me just take a step back and just say thank you to the main sponsor, Councilmember Reamer, and especially the Fed Committee for working through this for a very long time. I recognize, we all recognize that it is very technical, and that sometimes leads to confusion. Not only the technical aspect of the ZTA, but the subject matter and the scientific aspects of that ZTA as well. And the reality is, over the last year and a half, as has been said, we've been working from home, and some of us are, we're all having this conversation on Zoom. And so we all understand the importance of, our telecommunication network. And there is some confusion in the community about what the ZTA is. And neighbors have stopped me over the last 2 years. My inbox is full of people, pro and con, and some asking sincere, genuine questions about the nature of the ZTA. And as we're still talking about it now, there is a lot of misinformation that is out there. And I think we owe it to ourselves to try and clarify as much of that as possible. And I know there have been conversations, and they've lasted they started before I got to the council, and I understand that, but the confusion is real and it remains. And what I also know is that we need to enhance, broadband technology and make our technology more accessible to more people. We owe it to our constituents to do that. But we also owe it, as I think, public servants, to try and sort the fact from fiction. And I think that the best way to do that at this point in time is by organizing a small, limited task force that can help us achieve that. And so what I'm going to propose is that, I'm sorry?
Sorry, before you move that, I just wanted, the process should be, I just wanted to call on the committee members for their amendments first, okay? I didn't know you were going to move your amendment.
Well, so the reason I was going to do this is because the comments that you and others were just making was about the process over the next 2 weeks, trying to set the parameters for that. And so I thought this was the right time to say, I don't necessarily agree with that process.
Okay, you're totally entitled to move your amendment. Our protocols, normally we let the committee members go first, if that's okay.
Fine. And so
Great.
I will defer to you and the committee members, so long as we put a pause on that conversation about the council process moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I thought
Very
you were
good.
just commenting on the process. Chairman Reamer.
Thanks. Just to tie it down here, I recommend that we will straw vote on the 2 amendments that are in the packet, straw vote on any amendments that Ms. Nadeau identifies as easy and that she feels comfortable recommending to us, and then straw vote on the amended ZTA, and then we come back on the 27th. If not, I would personally prefer the 23rd or the sooner date, the 21st, I guess it would be, I don't know. Sydney, it's the 20th. Thank you.
20th.
23 plus 7. Just to ensure that it doesn't, well, you'll have to look at the calendar. Mr. Council President, you may have some major items before us on some of those dates that we have to resolve. I just don't know. But in any event, I suppose which either of those two dates is amenable. So again, straw votes on amendments, straw votes on the full ZTA, come back with any remaining items.
That sounds right. And I'll work with the clerk and the executive director on that, but let's work under the assumption we'll get it voted on, the final vote before August recess, right? Okay. Ms. Ndu, or Councilmember Breen, did you have an amendment you wanted?
I will turn it to Ms. Nadu to describe the amendments. If anyone wants to talk about we'll go from the amendments to the underlying ZTA. So we'll get to the bigger picture. First, we'll start with the smaller picture. So we'll start with the two amendments that are in the package.
So first is Councilmember Reamer's amendment that for new polls under the waiver objection process, since they are new, they do not have an established height already. So the height of a new pole would be the height of the nearest existing pole, and then they'd get the additional height that's normally allowed under the limited use standards. So that's the first amendment on the table.
In which page is that for everybody watching?
In my amendment, that is page. I apologize.
Well, while you look for the page, I can just clarify that this is sort of it was like almost an omission. We hadn't put a specific limit, as I recall, on the new poll. And so it was just clarifying something that needed to be clarified. How tall could the new pole be?
So this amendment is on page 13.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's page 13 of the memo, not of the ZTA.
And could you explain it again, please, Lavu, in sort of plain language?
Yes, absolutely. So by creating a process for the approval of new polls, a height standard needs to be set for that poll, since most of the height standards are based on the existing plus what you're adding. So what this does is, to start with, you take the height of the new pole would be the height of the nearest pre-existing pole. To start with that height, let's say it's 25 feet. And then you can add the amount of height that you can normally add under the limited use standards. So that's 6 feet if the right of way is 65 feet or less, and then plus 15 feet if the width of the right of way is greater than 65 feet.
Okay, so it's a minor clarifying amendment about how tall a new pole can be, keeping it in proportion to the nearest pole. So
you moving that?
I will move that.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor of that amendment, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Great.
The second amendment is Councilmember Friedson's amendment. So this is to avoid constructing new poles when there's already a pole there that can be used. So under the waiver and objection process, it does say where there's no pre-existing pole, but this makes that even clearer by stating that a new pole may only be constructed if there's no utility or streetlight pole within 150 feet of the proposed location. So if a provider wants to build a new pole, but there's another one 100 feet away, they should use that one instead of building a new one. Basically, this addresses the pole proliferation issue.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Friedson?
Yeah, thanks. This builds off of the amendments that we took up in committee that I had proposed, similar to Prince George's County, and basically just takes it one step further to address these issues of proliferation and the interest in focusing on existing poles to avoid new poles, which are seen by many to be the greatest intrusion to residents and should be avoided whenever possible. So I will move that.
Is there a second?
Second.
Friedson moves, Councilmember Reamer seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor of that amendment, please raise your hand. Great, that is unanimous. Ms. Ndu.
So next would actually be Well, I'll pause here and say next would be the amendment that I believe Councilmember Glass was trying to propose, because other than that, it would be the ZTA as a whole, notwithstanding any amendments that might come in the future based on review of the county executive memo.
Well, may I suggest, I don't think Mr. Glass is proposing an amendment. He's sort of proposing that we not take action at this time. So I'll leave it to the council president to decide when that is in order, but it's not specifically an amendment to the ZTA.
Councilmember Glass, do you have an amendment?
I have a proposal, and the proposal, as I was, stating a few minutes ago, is an understanding of the complications of this conversation, not only the substance, but also the process that we're trying to work through, and appreciate the two amendments that we just unanimously passed. And again, understanding where we're trying to go here, but there's still a lot of questions in the public realm. And so what I'm going to propose is that as we trying to sort fact from fiction, and quite frankly also because there is interest from council members, as I've heard over the last 45 minutes or so, from more analysis from what the county executive had sent over, because none of us have been able to digest that since it was sent over. What I'm going to propose is that a task force be created, and that members of that task force be appointed in the next 2 weeks, understanding the speed and to no longer prolong conversation. I understand that. And in no way should a task force be construed to be a delay in conversation. In fact, it should be understood to be a clarifying conversation, sorting fact from fiction. And what I propose is that that task force be made up of 2 municipal leaders, 2 community representatives, 2 members of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee, 2 designees from the county council, and 2 industry representatives. And this task force would have a very limited time frame and would be asked to report back to the council after the August recess in September, allowing us to take action shortly after we return. Because again, this is all about information and clarification. And the reason I'm recommending that members of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee be a part of this task force is because this ZTA was introduced prior to council action requiring that ZTAs have a racial equity and social impact statement. And we know that communities of color continue to experience the quote unquote racial tech gap, which puts them at an economic disadvantage to our growing digital economy. And so I think that needs to be part of this conversation in a timely manner so that we can move forward based on all of the work that has been done by this council and building upon the work that was done at the last council as well. So that is an idea. Quite frankly, I'll move that motion, whether or not it is an actual amendment or just an action of the council.
Well, at this point, I think we're taking amendments to the ZTA, and we're not going to be voting on the ZTA final one today, and we certainly may have another work session. So,
well, then if the only way that would be considered is an actual amendment to the ZTA, then I'd move that it be an amendment to the ZTA.
Right. I don't know if it's written up that way, but anyway, let's see. Councilmember Navarro.
First of all, I'll second that.
Actually, I wanted to be recognized because I had a very minor technical amendment, but I mean, since this has been moved and amended and seconded, I just want to say that I'm not supportive of that approach. But I do want to be put back on the queue because there is a very minor amendment that I know Ms. Lebu had. She didn't mention it, but I do have very minor one.
Sure, I'll keep you in the queue for sure. But so Councilmember Glass, regardless of the merits of the working group, it's not written up as an amendment to this right now. I think we would have to just have a discussion of that once we are done with taking up amendments to this today.
You're saying at the conclusion of
It might be a few minutes from now, but we agreed to take amendments to the ZTA, and yours, I mean, I don't think yours is written up that way. I think we would have to do that. Ms. Ndu, can you provide any guidance on this?
Yeah, so the next amendment would be Councilmember Navarro's amendment, and then the only thing after that would be the ZTA as a whole. I believe Councilmember Navarro's is the final like amendment. So I would suggest doing that amendment, and then I'll leave it up to you, Council President Hucker, if you want to discuss Councilmember Glass's proposal before or after taking a straw vote on the ZTA as a whole.
Point of information.
Yeah.
I don't know how we can take a straw vote on the ZTA as a whole if there's going to be another work session with amendments next week. I just don't think that makes sense to do. So I think we should, whatever amendments are ready to go, let's do those, and then.
Right. I agree. People, if we said people want the opportunity to act on or think of their own or act on the county executive's memo, I think we should give them that opportunity. Council Chair Reamer has been trying to get in here.
I just want to say, I don't think that Mr. Glass's language can be added to the ZTA. If we were to pass the ZTA, it would say that this ZTA is not, the council shouldn't consider it, because we should have a task force instead of passing it. I mean, like, there isn't a circular logic to it there. I think I would suggest to Mr. Glass, you could, after we are done with our straw votes, you could make a motion for a sense of the council, or you could just wait for our return next week. And if council members agreed with you, then that would be what happens on the 27th rather than final action. I mean, you can't take final action on the ZTA and conduct a work group about it in August. So, it's either one or the other.
I was thinking we would take a motion to table the ZTA or something if that's what.
I mean, that would be the parliamentary way to achieve such a thing.
Right.
If you wanted to do it in a parliamentary way versus just not ever bringing it to a vote and then organizing a task force. So there are different ways to proceed. Well, again, I think we ought to go through the straw votes on amendments.
I agree.
And as we've discussed, return to the to the underlying ZTA. I think we ought to take a straw vote on the underlying ZTA. I did think that we could identify any of the executive's proposed minor ZTAs. If Levu is not comfortable with that, I would certainly understand, having only had a few hours to review that. Again, I think Ms. Navarro, I don't know how Mr. Glass's motion is in order at this point. I think Ms. Navarro's is certainly in order.
Agreed. And I think, Mr. Glass's motion, if we wanted to go down that path, there'd be time to take it up and essentially table this CTA until after the task force were, able to meet and make some recommendations in August, September, I guess. But anyway, I agree that we should take up the amendments that are before us that are written as amendments now and defer action on the rest. Councilmember Katz.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I believe, candidly, we should take up Councilmember Navarro's amendment, and then, even if you're not going to take up what Councilmember Glass has proposed, which I am supportive of, if you don't take that up today, we should at least have some sort of a discussion on it so that staff will know whether or not to prepare something for the 27th. This is a very important part of this discussion, and I believe we need to have the discussion. What we keep saying is we're going to put this off. Nobody wants to put this off. We want to come back very quickly with the best possible legislation that it can possibly be. And I believe our public wants that as well. So I suggest that we take up Councilmember Navarro's amendment, which I'm supportive of, by the way, and then we have a discussion, whether it be in what form, whatever form, for the working group. Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, Councilmember Albornoz.
No, I'll defer to Councilmember Navarro's amendment, and then I'll come back and speak to Councilmember Glass's proposal.
Great. Okay. Any other requests to speak on this process question? Okay, let's take up Councilmember Navarro's amendment. Councilmember Navarro, do you want to move it and describe it?
Thank you. Yes, so this is actually language that addresses issues and concerns regarding tree loss minimization. I understand that this language is a way to signal to the executive and make a request, but that in order for it to have very solid teeth, it is better to put it through a bill in order for it to get into the code. However, I would like to, as a first step, make sure that the language is included in the ZTA, and then we can evaluate, if there is interest in an actual bill. It was distributed earlier today, and I know Ms. Nadeau did okay this language, and basically it just says the county executive must include tree loss minimization language in all franchise and license agreements signed after the effective date of the ZTA 1907. Critical damage to the root zone of trees as well as excessive pruning should be avoided in the installation of telecommunication towers, regardless of whether they are installed on a new, pre-existing, or replacement pole. And I know all of us have also heard feedback with concerns regarding loss of our tree canopy, and it's something that I know previous councils we have worked really hard to preserve our tree canopy. So I would like to move that we include this language, and again, understand that it could even be stronger if we brought it back in a bill, and we can deliberate on that in a later date.
Second.
I'd like to move that. Thank you.
Okay, moved and Councilmember Rice seconded. Any discussion?
Thank you to Councilmember Navarro for bringing us this language. I think this is a concern, and it's important that it be considered and addressed as we proceed with this issue. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion on this amendment? All those in favor of this very good amendment, raise your hand. Great, that is unanimous.
Are you going to preface every amendment that I make like that, Mr. Doctor? I hope so.
Depends on if you vote for mine. Okay.
Absolutely. Every one of yours has been a wonderful suggestion.
I think Council Vice President Albornoz, you were next.
Well, thank you. I'm speaking in response to Councilmember Glass's proposal and Councilmember Katz's support of that proposal. So I certainly understand where they're coming from. I've also received emails in the last few days.
Can we just clarify, there are no other amendments, right?
Unless the council would like me to go through the county executive's memo. I will preface with, I will be quickly pulling out the easiest ones. That doesn't mean there won't be any later, but I can do that if the council wishes.
Do you prefer to do that today, or would you prefer to just have an hour on next week's agenda to, put any of these in writing?
I'd prefer that if the council is okay with that.
I think we're going to give you deference to your great expertise on this. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, could I just make a suggestion on that? Could I think it would be helpful if the amendments, if there's some time for Ms. Nadeau to go through them, I think they should only be brought forward if a council member brings them forward. I don't think the county executive, by his actions, has earned the right to have each last minute, amendment that is thrown before us in a haphazard and fairly disingenuous way to be, treated as seriously as that. But I think that there are, some things in there clearly that it seems are appropriate. If a council member wants to bring that forward, they could. And Council President, I would just suggest that we have, whether it's council members or county executive, or that amendments be cut off at a certain point and be required to be put in writing as part of the packet for next Tuesday. I don't know what that date is. Maybe it's Thursday when the packet is due, whatever the case may be, and that we not take, we agree to not take up amendments unless they are, technical, legal, but not take up substantive amendments after a certain point, because we've got to get out of this process of receiving memos within an hour of meetings. This is just not doing justice to the process or to the citizens that we serve.
I totally agree. We, as you know, we've wanted to hold ourselves to that standard after the last retreat, and I think I said that earlier, that the council county executive sending something over at the last minute doesn't constitute an amendment that's in order. I think for the council, it has to be sponsored by a council member and seconded by a council member for us to spend our time discussing it. So we can have some time on the agenda to do it next week, and then wrap this up on the 27th.
So all amendments, so we would agree that all amendments would have to be in before Thursday and in the packet.
Ms. Ndu, is that right? Thursday is the right date?
Thursday, yes,
Great.
Thursday would be the last day for the packet.
Okay, so everybody's heard that. If you want an amendment next week, get it in by Thursday. Okay.
Mr. Albornoz was speaking.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks. Just I'll try to make this quick. I appreciate the intent of the motion to add another work group of some kind to conduct some level of additional analysis. I'll just point out that we've heard from industry a lot. We've heard from the community a lot. We've heard from the executive branch. We've heard from the council. And there has been a discussion with regards to the racial inequities with regards to broadband and 5G. And that underlies every vote that we take, thanks to infinitely, we're always going to have to acknowledge the great leadership of Councilmember Navarro on this issue. And so I don't believe that a task force will yield anything new other than truly just delaying this process even further, because then there will be a debate as to who the community members are, who the industry people are. And we've heard from everyone that we're ever going to hear from multiple times on this issue. And I give our central office staff a great deal of credit for sorting through that information. And Ms. Nadu, once again, as well as our Fed committee, having gone through an arduous process and great debate and discussion, which we are having right now. And I think, once again, we're ending up in a reasonable place to allow for some more time to go through the unfortunate delay in the memo that we received. But I do believe that we are in a position, with the information we've received, to take action before the August recess. And so I will not support this motion because I don't believe it's going to yield any additional information beyond what we've already been able to secure. But I respect the position from which my colleagues have presented that option, but I won't be supporting it.
Okay, Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to all my colleagues. And I start off by thanking Councilmember Reamer and the people on the Fed committee and everyone associated with this. I would like to vote for this ZTA. I would, but I sincerely believe that because this is so very technical, because this has had so much information and misinformation on this topic, then I believe that we would be doing ourselves a service, in fact, would be doing ourselves a disservice if we did not do what it is a reasonable approach to say the middle of September. I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but I think Councilmember Glass was September, 21st, that we go on recess in August anyhow. We know that there are pending lawsuits, which the county has been involved in, that are supposed to come back. They've been held in abeyance, and they're supposed to come back until in August, so that we would know whether we were or were not successful on those lawsuits. We know that the FCC, and I'm not trying to hold anything up, but we know that the FCC right now is of the 5 members, there's only 4, and it's 2 and 2 appointed by different administrations. And so that we know that there's a possibility that the FCC themselves could be changing something. And if we went to the middle of September and said that is the day that we will vote on this issue, and allow our public one last time to see what we voted on. We've come up with amendments up to within the last hour that they have not had an opportunity to comment on, and I voted for every one of them. I think they're good amendments, but they have not had an opportunity to hear what we have heard. And I believe that if we were to wait those 6 weeks or whatever it is, 10 weeks, from today that at that point we have given everything we can to get the very, very, very best legislation for something that's so very important that's going to be affecting our public for the next many, many, many years. And I just think that that would be the most sensible and logical way to go about it. Do I know that there's 5 votes? I do not. But I do believe that that's the right thing to do. And I, as I say in the very beginning, I would like to vote for this ZTA. But if there's not a work group, I have real problems with it. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield back.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. You know, if we were the first jurisdiction in this country to be moving forward with this, oftentimes like Montgomery County does, Montgomery County leads, then I would be more hesitant in this situation in terms of watching and waiting what happens with our court system. But we are certainly not the first, nor are we anywhere close across this country and in this region. And so I just wanted to highlight that. If we were not in alignment with, and I just told you, guys, I came back from a White House intergovernmental affairs meeting around the recommendations of the National Association of Counties Broadband Task Force. And the White House is full and all in when it comes to broadband as well as 5G deployment. So let me just be very clear. What we're hearing from folks in the White House and the administration is all about broadband and 5G deployment. And so if I didn't know that and hear that, I would have more hesitation. You know, the time that I spent over the past year and a half working on this task force and understanding, as I said at the onset, how important this is when it comes to racial equity and social justice, understanding that 5G is a key component of that, understanding that many of our underserved and low-income areas are one of the ones that may be challenged by not being able to get fiber in all the times, nor requiring companies to put fiber in. And so 5G may be our way in which we can counteract some of the lack of movement by some of our cable providers. Then that's another reason why then I might have hesitancy. But all those things are true. All those things are happening. And so because of that, we need to move forward. I can't stress enough that anyone who's talking about equity needs to understand that 5G is a part of that equation. 5G is a part of the equity discussion. It is not the other way around. It is exactly the opposite. I was just talking to somebody via text and saying that we're concerned about making sure that the towers actually go in neighborhoods of color and lower socioeconomic status than, you know, some of the more affluent areas. That's a concern, not the other way around. So let me just be very clear. For me, this is about moving this forward as quickly as possible as the entire recommendations that we've had from the Broadband Task Force. And so my job now is to try and make sure that we're pushing this so that folks can get access. We've seen the suffering. We've seen the people who have really been marginalized as a result of their lack of access to digital technology. So we've got to promote this. We've got to be full on, full steam ahead in moving this forward, not waiting until September, not waiting until tomorrow. We need to act now because every day that we continue to wait, people lose opportunities as a result. So I will not be supporting this direction of going into council. I think that we need to be aggressive. We need to make sure that we're keeping up with what other folks are doing in the region. And we need to make sure that we're keeping pace with where the administration and I think the FCC, as well as this country, is going to be headed in. So thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned the other jurisdictions, and I may have missed this in the packet. Can you remind us, Councilman, what are the other Maryland jurisdictions or Mislet and Do that have passed? I know about DC and Virginia, but
Prince George's County.
And what's the posture of Baltimore, Baltimore County, Howard, et cetera?
Give me 1 second. Pulling it up in my notes.
They're all under the same FCC order, right?
Yes, everybody's under the same FCC order. So the other jurisdictions, so in addition to Prince George's County, I won't call these other jurisdictions, but Rockville and Gaithersburg have passed their own separate legislation. And then Howard County and Baltimore County and Ocean City also have legislation.
That's passed or is proposed?
Passed.
Passed. Okay. Chairman Reamer.
Baltimore adopted its ordinance some time ago. And
Mhm.
if you Google search in Baltimore 5G, you'll see photographs of antennas that are already going up on the streets in Baltimore, and they look okay. There are antennas installed on the boardwalk in Ocean City. They are deployed in other jurisdictions, but Baltimore is way ahead of us. Prince George's is ahead of us. I can't speak to that many other jurisdictions in Maryland at this point, but I think we are more of an outlier at this point than anything.
Okay. So, Councilmember Glass.
Mr. President.
Yes, Councilmember Joanda. Sorry, you're in the queue.
Yep. Thank you. I just following on Councilmember Katz's comments. He wants to vote for it. I did vote for it in committee, at least, and I think this will pass. If whether it passes on the 27th or on September 15th is in the grand scheme of things is not going to be a huge deal. I'll say that. I mean, we can make it a big deal if we'd like, but it's not. We really need the Biden infrastructure plan to pass, which will really help us expand, the broadband and amplify any rollout of 5G, which does need to happen. Also, I often talk about Montgomery County is a great place. We also got a lot to work on. Also true is that it is a shame that there's a lawsuit active to say you need to study the ongoing health effects. We should be doing that for everything that is a new technology. And, we'll see how that goes, but that doesn't mean this isn't going to move forward or shouldn't move forward and that it shouldn't be studied. It should. There should be an update to that. And all the studies that were mentioned by Mr. Reamer and all that should be aggregated. There should be, updated and actual guidance, new guidance put out. We do need to get that FCC spot filled. All that can be true. But I do think on balance, we're going to have to move forward with this. I do also understand Councilmember Glass's point. I've received 2 mailers, as I'm sure all of you have, about what this is going to do. And I've had regular, normal, hardworking folks just say, what's going to happen to me is this, and it's unfortunate disinformation that has come out. But it does have people scared and worried about what's going on. And so are we going to solve that if we wait till September 15th? Probably not. There's still, but I just want to speak to those as real concerns. And I understand the why this would be put forward. I'm going to support, the ZTA as I did in committee. But I do think that allowing the time for some of these considerations, albeit unduly late and like they have been several times from the executive side, and I agree with my colleagues on that, to look at those. And then when the court cases come down on these 2 remaining issues, or if the FCC goes in a different direction, then we will do as we always do, and we will, update things. But, I do think we need to move forward. I don't think we're voting on this because it's not a motion to vote, I don't believe, but I would be fine if we voted in September. I don't see a problem with that. I'd be fine if we vote on the 27th. So I just wanted to give voice to that because I understand why it was put forward. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. I mean, generally speaking, I'll mention again what I said at the first session. To me, the experience of this pandemic was profound. And just today, we spoke about how we don't even have a handle yet, an understanding of the extraordinary impact that this has had on low-income communities, particularly on students who did not have the proper access and the learning loss that required. And all of a sudden, this issue of access to broadband became real in the conversation about equity, economic sufficiency, about access to opportunities and everything like that. We had been talking about this for a while. And when this was first introduced, I had the same exact concerns that we keep hearing about and that people keep tweeting at us about and people keep talking about. I had those same exact concerns. And we have had a lot of conversations about these issues, and we've read a lot of studies about it. And the pandemic hit and it became real. And so at some point, there has to be a recognition that there are going to be particular elements that we need to push forward in order to address the issues of those who are most in need. Someone had sent me a screenshot of a place, a very small town in El Salvador, where two young men were very innovative and created something called Bada Wi-Fi on a stick, where they put a particular phone in a bag and then climbed up a very high pole and then provided access to students. This is what people have to do around the world in order to have access. And so in a county like ours, when we talk about equity, let's make sure that we're using that at fidelity, because it is about providing that access to populations who have been disproportionately impacted. And again, that is why for me, I don't take this lightly. I don't make this decision lightly. But I think that we have learned a lot, and we need to move forward. Other jurisdictions have done that. We've talked about our competitive edge in the region and how we have been really falling behind in a lot of particular areas. This, I believe, is an important one. Councilmember Rice has articulated this very nicely in terms of what's happening on the national scene. And so I think Montgomery County has to lead. And we're a little bit behind as far as I'm concerned, and we need to catch up. So that's why I believe that it is not true that there has not been ample discussions and ample exchanges and ample communication with constituents. It has happened. It's been happening for more like 2 years. So to somehow frame this as if there just has not been any discussion and therefore we need to have another work group, to me seems very cosmetic. And personally, and I don't know where the votes are, but personally, I think that we should go ahead and vote. And the FET committee has done extraordinary work, and the analysts have done extraordinary work. The community has been involved, and the pandemic has come to remind us as to why it's time to move ahead. So thank you, Mr. President, for allowing me to make my remarks.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Council President, I'm not sure if there is a formal motion to table before us, or if we're just talking in a more informal way. So I'll talk informally. So I do think that the county executive's actions were not serious and not done in a serious way. But if there are serious issues that were raised in the memo, I think we have an obligation to take those up in a serious manner. And so I do think that it's important that we weigh those, that we deliberate them, that we discuss them. I think we need to do them in a reasonable and sober way, and that isn't by reading a memo as we're meeting and discussing them. And so I agree that it makes sense for us to have those in writing, have analysis by our staff, and then take them up to be able to talk with each other and talk with our own staffs and talk with relevant stakeholders beforehand. I mean, that is an appropriate thing for us to do. I think we are taking the sober and methodical path here. I do hope, as I said before, that we set a deadline for amendments and we hold ourselves to them. I think that is important. And I do think that we need to move forward. I think, whether it's Tuesday or the following Tuesday, at which point we have taken up the amendments that have come before us and have weighed what has been more than 2 years of discussion and deliberation, 3 public committee sessions, and now 2 prolonged council work sessions. I think at a certain point we have an obligation to weigh the facts before us and to make the best decisions we can with the information that we have. understanding, as Councilmember Giwando mentioned, we can come back. These are zoning text amendments, and we can amend what is needed based on new federal legal parameters that we have. I think it's important to note that we are limited in terms of what our authority actually is. There's a lot of misunderstanding about that as well. And I do think that we ought to move forward with that. And when it comes to the county executive's proposal for a working group that has been discussed here, we had 3 Fed sessions, which came after more than a year and a half of public discussion of this issue. At each one of those sessions, we requested beforehand, during, and after for the executive branch to move forward specific amendments, specific ideas to address specific issues. We received nothing. We received nothing leading up to yesterday's session, or last week's session, excuse me, until the absolute last minute, literally the moment we were expected to start the discussion. And then this idea of a working group has been added, many months after, and these amendments have come at the last minute. So it's hard to delay the process in order to give that serious consideration. I do think that we should take up the serious proposals, but I think we need to move forward. I think we need to decide on what we need to decide. I will say, as late as yesterday, my staff asked the executive branch staff if they were going to be proposing amendments, and we were told they were not. So either these amendments were developed in a very hasty manner, or there's some serious internal challenges. So I do think, in the interest of the process, we've got to improve on that as well. Others have mentioned that, and I agree with it, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate hearing all the comments from my colleagues. Clearly, there is not a majority to create any sort of working group, and I respect that. I understand the points that everybody has made. I give a lot of credit to the Fed committee and to staff and to the stakeholders who've been having this conversation for a very long time, and I absolutely acknowledge that. We all acknowledge it. For me personally, as a former journalist, I'm always going to try to provide more information and to try and clear up confusion or misunderstanding when I see it. And my inbox shows that there remains a lot of misunderstanding. And so the proposal / amendment / parliamentary procedure of your choice that I was just trying to do was just one last attempt to level set and for everybody to understand the parameters that we're working under from the federal government and some of the other aspects that one would take up in consideration. And then lastly, I'll just say that as for the technology, we have moved as a nation, as a planet, from 4G to broadband, and now we're talking about 5G, and yet the racial tech gap exists, and it still exists. And the reason I brought up the racial equity component is because I want to make sure that no community is left behind. And if there's anything that I've heard from us today, from you all, my colleagues, it is a commitment to that. And I hope that we do come back after this ZTA moves, and I hear how all where the support is, that we come back and so we can assess how our internet connectivity is in our county and our region, and how we can continue improving that. And I know, that Councilmember Reamer, the sponsor of this ZTA, has been working on that for a very long time as well. And so a nod to that work, but that work needs to continue. So there is no parliamentary procedure on the table, so there's nothing more than for me to say I yield back, Mr. President.
Okay, thanks. So I don't see any other requests to speak. I think we've exhausted this topic and taken up the amendments we have today, Ms. Ndu. And if anybody wants to write up an actual amendment and bring it to Ms. Ndu by Thursday, we can talk about it. We can have it in the packet. We can talk about it next week. And then if there are no more amendments, then we'll take up a vote on the amended ZTA. Is that fine with everybody?
You're talking
Great.
about Thursday, it's like 2 days from now, Thursday. That's a little. I thought we were talking about the next week, but I just want to clarify what we're talking about.
Sorry, so the Thursday deadline would be for anything to be in the packet in time for council session on the 20th.
Okay.
It's
So,
5 days lead time.
Ms. Nadeau, then on your behalf, then that's fine. Can we just make sure that you have a chance to do your analysis and send something around to council members so that we can have the chance to get those things back to you if someone wants to do something by Thursday?
Sorry, I guess I'll clarify. Is the request to send a memo? I guess I could draft a memo going over the county executive's memo. I can send that out to council members.
I could just call you after. We could have a meeting after one-on-one, but that would be better for everybody. Just like once you got a chance to read through the thing, that you sent something to us saying, here's what I think is relevant and or not. And
A staff recommendation.
yeah, have a recommendation that and or a brief overview of everything. And then that way we can use that in the next 48 hours, I guess, to come back and say we want to put an amendment in or not. That's what I'm saying. So
yes,
we would probably need that from you by midday
I can
tomorrow.
absolutely do that. I assume you'd probably need it by late morning tomorrow, and that I can definitely do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Ms. Nadeau.
Thank you. Ms. Spielberg, your hand is up. Can you also help us explain why we got our second 11th and a half hour memo? From the
Sure, and I apologize I wasn't available earlier.
It puts all my colleagues in a very difficult position. I hope you understand that.
I do. I hear you. Basically, what we sent over this time was just a legislative version of what had been sent last week. We had not realized, we had put that forward. Obviously, the county executive doesn't have an option. He's not one to offer amendments, so we hadn't thought that we needed to do that. We've been contacted by many, many residents who have appreciated the memo and who then asked us when they weren't certain whether anyone else was going to put it forward, and they asked us to send it forward and over. And so we agreed to do that. But we had thought that it was out there last week in the written form.
But I mean, Debbie, you used to work in our building. You just have to go to a council member and ask them to introduce an amendment. You're very familiar with the process, at least as much as I am.
Yes, but
you can't do much with a memo.
I will say I wasn't getting, we weren't getting clear answers. I mean, I did try to reach some staff and wasn't clear on what was happening. And Councilmember Friedson, as of yesterday, I mean, I don't view what we sent over today as something new. This is just follow up. I believe there are a couple of things that were viewed as potential suggestions, and I apologize for the new stuff. They're not required. It was fleshing out what was in there, and it was for your consideration. So I'm not sure, it was not anything new. It was to put it into legislative language for you guys.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Nadeau, we're good moving forward. Everybody will send in any suggested amendments to Ms. Nadeau by Thursday. Is that fine? Great.
Ms. Nadeau will review the executive's memo
Yes.
and share an analysis.
Sure. Sounds good. Okay. Everybody's good, comfortable, great. I think we can move off item 10 to item 11.